bit of a sort of historical backdrop for those folks who like this sort of thing. OutsideIn Strategic Matrix, it's now gone through sort of 4 or 5 iterations, and was created back within the Virgin Group back in the early 2000s. And what we were doing then was running an approach which was pretty similar to Six Sigma. It was called 8 Omega. Some folks are still licensed to actually deliver that out there, and nothing wrong with the approach. It's just it's inside out, right? Discovery, analysis, design, validate, integrate, implement, control, and improve. And the thing we would all observe that's missing from that is the customer. So that was really the genesis around the CEMMethod back nearly 20 years ago now. Customer experience management method, customer expectation management method. And one of the underpinning ideas behind that was being able to articulate the successful customer outcome. So as I said, this has gone through 4 incarnations. So I'm showing you the 2020 version in a moment or two. But before we get into that, the OutsideIn Strategic Matrix was one of the first reframing tools that was created as part of the method. So it's my go-to thing whenever I'm trying to understand clients. And this is what it looks like. So what I'd like you to do with your pen and paper is to draw, as you can see there, 4 rows with 2 primary columns, okay? And then label the boxes, the 4 rows and the 2 columns exactly as it is there: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So take 30 seconds to do that. While you're doing that, just to talk a little bit about what this perspective is about, it's allowing people to move from a classic process view of the world to a customer experience view. So as I said, frequently process is bounded like that, quite narrow, and the customer experience is bounded like that. So what we really want to be thinking about is, are the 2 different? Given Mr. Jobs said, no, the customer experience is the process. If we can acknowledge this, what does this look like? And how can it inform the way we might engineer process in terms of our organizations now? So if we've all got that sort of diagram in place, no need to write the big bold text, what industry are you in, anything like that. I'm going to go through it. And the example I'm going to use is from the airline industry. So I'll try not to badmouth too many airline players in this little case study, but honestly, I can't avoid doing it sometimes, and those folks know who they are. So there's nobody here in the airline industry, so there's nobody going to go away battered and bruised from today. So the first question we're going to ask, and I want you, as I'm going to talk this example through, I want you to do this for yourself. And we're going to start off with box A. So what industry are you in? So if Ali's going off working in the banking sector quite soon, so it would not be unnatural. Ali, what industry would you say banks are in?
Financial services would be the traditional view.
I'm sorry, mate, you seem to be muted there.
I read traditionally financial services.
I'm using my lip reading skill there. You're saying something about the financial services or whatever. So, yeah.
Yes.
Not to worry. No, I've got that. If Sally in New Zealand, Sally, what industry is the work that you're doing in?
So defence as a whole, or my particular piece?
Just checking
Defence
out.
is...
You all inadvertently. No, I seem to be okay. Good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. That's just on the periphery of hearing. Yes.
So defence as a whole, we're in the business of protecting or securing New Zealand's
in the
interests.
defence sort of sector. See if that's a little bit better. Yeah, in the defence sector, we probably classically sort of say, oh, yeah, we're in the industry of, and there'll be a bunch of descriptions that if you ask the strategic team, what industry do you think you're in? There are stock standard answers for that industry question. So when we talk about the airline industry and we ask the question and we said, what industry are you in? They will say, well, we fly planes. We're in the airline industry. Now, short answer for this is when you're thinking about the industry you're in, is what do you actually do? You know, what are you about? So if I went to, say, a Tesco's in the UK, which is a large grocery chain, and asked them what industry are you in, they would say, well, we're in retail food. Right? And not naturally, you'd think, well, you're going to go and benchmark yourself against other people who are in that space to see how they're performing. And we'll come on to that in a little while. So the answer is we fly planes. What I want you to do is think about your situation. Ali, I think you're unmuted now, so could you perhaps mute yourself again? We've got a bit of an echo happening there, which, oh, yep, fantastic, thank you. So in the airline industry, we fly planes, we're in the airline industry. You know, it's not a trick question, this. So think about your situation and think about an organization that you know and love, perhaps one where you're working now or one where you will be working or perhaps one where you have worked, and write that in the top left-hand box as well. Okay, so there you go. I've written the airline industry in box A. And if you like, when I'm doing this, I'm thinking we're taking people on baby steps to reframe them from process thinking to customer experience thinking. The second question, again, a fairly natural one, where does the process start and end at the moment? So if we take this sort of process view and we think about box B, let's think about the traditional answer, which is, well, our processes as an airline start from when somebody buys a ticket to the time when they get the bag off the carousel at the end of the journey, fingers crossed. Now, why is that definition in the airline industry so important? Well, one of the systemic problems in the airline industry is lost and damaged bags. And there's a number of statistics that come out every year. But for last year, I'll take an example. I said I'm not going to name anybody, but I'm going to now. British Airways are on record and publicised figures of 26% of their bags were lost or damaged in transit. 1 in 4 bags damaged or lost in transit. That's an alarming number. So airlines are trying to get a fix on this by looking at what actually happens to the bag. What is the journey the bag takes and how do we improve it? So where the process starts and finishes is quite important. So from, say, BA's point of view, it's when somebody buys a ticket to when they get the bag off the carousel, fingers crossed. All right, makes sense? So you do box B for yours. When we've got the boxes A, B, C, D completed, I'm going to ask for a little bit of feedback. So put in your box B, where do your processes start at the moment and where do they end? So thinking of Sally's world and defense, you know, what's the sort of starting point and when is that over? You know, what would that be? Thinking about probably Ellie in, say it was banking, I'm not saying you should choose that example, but if you're thinking about banking, it might be from when somebody inquires about an account and it's over when they leave us as a customer, perhaps. It's going to be something like that. So it's a pretty straightforward answer. And when you've got folks in the room actually doing this, it is, again, it's not good or bad, it just is what it is. So let's put the airline one in there. So when we think about the airline one, what would that be? That's going to be, oh, well, ticket to carousel. It's as straightforward as that. All right. We're good so far? Good. Nodding heads, that's good, yeah. So let's move this on now to box C. So what are the main points of contact? So within that ticket to carousel process, there's a bunch of things there, like buy the ticket, arrive at the airport, check your bags, get on and off the plane, clear immigration, collect the bag. Again, fingers crossed. And so what we're going to do with that is, in terms of the main touch points, is put those in box C. So give yourself 2 or 3 minutes to actually think of those. What would the main touch points be in between the start of this process and the end of this? But not all of them, but and I say touch points, it's really when you know, like buy the ticket, arrive at the airport. You can see they're all very customer oriented things, aren't they? But those would be the main touch points for the customer with our process. So 2 minutes to do that. Okay. And some people, when you're doing this, they'll come up with 10. Some people come up with 2. I tend to sort of think about it doesn't matter on whatever process you're looking at. There's probably some key headline things, and there's usually 5 or 6. 6 will give you enough granularity to work with later on. If you only got 2 or 3, you're probably dealing with people who are thinking very strategically. If you've got people who are at a real detailed level, then they'll have that 10 or 12. The way to handle these sort of techniques is to time box them. Is not to look on it as analysis paralysis and people keep writing things down. Is to sort of say, okay, guys, you've got 3 or 4 minutes, have a discussion, put it down. So if you're using this, once we've completed the overall the 6 or 7 weeks, and you're actually using it with a vengeance, bear in mind it's not an analytical exercise; it's a time boxed exercise. And as some of you know, I have a phrase whenever we're doing this sort of work. Is to understand when you're ready to move on, you have to answer the question, how much do we need to know we know enough, and then move on. So it's not about 5 levels of decomposition of our processes. It's not about understanding, the nano detail here. It's about knowing enough that we know enough we can move on. Simple as that, really. Okay, let's move on. So to box D. Now, in the context of the airline again, what does success actually look like? Well, what do we mean by that? Well, success is usually in the numbers. It's usually in the metrics by which we govern our behavior across the organization. So if you have a look at the metrics for the organization you're working with at the moment, for the business, that will give you an insight into what current success looks like. So I'll give you another example besides the airline industry. If I was thinking about program management, project management, there's the old classic measures that have you coming on time, to budget, and achieve the deliverables. So there's some elements in there. What was the budget? What was the timeliness? And what are the deliverables? And have we actually achieved them? So if we were putting that into box D, that would be it. How do we know what does success look like? Well, it's coming in on time, to budget, and we deliver what we said we were going to deliver. Makes sense? So with an airline, of course, it's like the lowest operating costs and the highest amount of revenue. Those are 2 big metrics that they will focus on in a classic sort of airline industry way. So again, take 2 minutes for yourself. What does success look like for the organization you're thinking of at the moment? So you can see with this overall technique, it's not sort of rocket science or brain surgery. It's pretty much you get anybody in the room. They don't have to understand the process or customer experience or any method as such. They just have to be able to answer these questions. And you do get some surprising answers, but it's one of those sort of framing things. It will tell you about where the focus is. So going to that example that Lyle was sharing earlier on in sort of a public administration, public services space, is people will very much define themselves by the silo or the function that they're in, the department that they're working for, the divisional objectives. It's all very much that pyramidal pin factory mindset thing. One of the ways of helping to shift that is, first of all, to acknowledge there is that view and capture it without passing any judgment of whether it's good or bad. And then going to do what we're going to do next, which is to reframe it. But before we do that, any questions, observations you wish to share?
I guess, yeah, I guess I'm thinking about
it. Sorry, you go ahead, Alistair.
Okay. So I was thinking about the banks, if we took a mortgage, I'm thinking about the mortgage example there, where, okay. You might think about mortgage applications through to actually provisioning the home loan. But I think, the bigger process metric I guess they look at is customer loyalty on my bank customers. They know that within that first 9 months, if they get the home loan, then if they can get 2 other products in, they have this received wisdom that classifies that customer as a my bank customer, which means they see that bank as their main bank. In these days of less loyalty, and certainly the banks don't help themselves with that. It's interesting to think about that process as to Is it just the mortgage, or is it then the on-sell and the upsell to get to this metric of my bank?
And of course, that metric doesn't necessarily really indicate loyalty. It just sort of says, you know, that customer may be very transient and move the money, and the volatility in the marketplace at the moment, you know, like you and I as customers, we're now able to access information like never before. So it's fairly easy for us to actually have a savings product, perhaps an home loan, perhaps a current account. But hey, you know, I'm not getting the service there. You can just switch like that. You're not, you know, and yet you'll still see certain banks being punitive about preventing people from switching. As if you're going to keep the loyalty even longer if you prevent them by being punitive. But of course, that just builds up that groundswell, which is, you know, given half a chance, I'm going to move when I get a chance. You know?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Sally, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so I probably took too hard a process, but I thought about, well, what do we do? Well, you know, the start of the process is when the threat occurs, and then it finishes once we've mitigated it. But actually, we do things before that, and preparing for potential threats, and then things afterwards. But so I just took it from the threat occurs until the mission's complete and the risk is being mitigated. But then I had some when we did the process steps, well, not the steps, but what was that piece called? Column C.
Yep.
Because it's not always obvious, or we're directly interacting with the customer, I wasn't sure whether I was getting the right level of steps in there. You know, so I had things like, you know, we do some mission response options, and then the government agrees on an option, and then we prepare, you know, make sure we've got all the people, and we deploy, and then we execute the mission, and then we come back to lessons learned and stuff like that.
That's good. Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure whether it works in this case or not. And then when I thought about what the success looks like, well, obviously the threat's been mitigated, but we've also able to sustain our preparations for the next threat, or we'll be able to do multiple things at once. So I'm not quite sure whether I've got that level of success.
Yeah, and that ambiguity frequently comes when you're asking these questions, and having a bunch of people in the room when you ask these questions is, again, realizing that these different perceptions tell you why sometimes we're doing things which aren't, you know, are counterproductive and not aligned to delivering our mutual success. The other thing I'd say at this stage as well, and it perhaps helps, remember the F1 example in week 1, and we said, who is the customer here? And we said, well, it's the guy in the car for the people who are changing the wheels. But the customer's customer, the guy in the car, his customer is the fan. So the neat thing about the OutsideIn strategic matrix, it's completely scalable. So you could be doing this as an IT function, for instance, and you're looking at your internal customers, and you're defining in exactly the same way. So it's not predicated on the idea that it must always be the external customer. And to your point as well, Sally, is often going through these steps and stages will actually challenge who the real customer is. Who are we serving? Are we an internal function just serving another internal function who's serving another internal function? And one of the observations at the moment is, we touched on it in week 1, is we used to define businesses like business to business, B2B, or business to consumer, and so on like that. But there really isn't that anymore. It doesn't matter what you're doing. So in defense, you know, looking after citizens and things, you can define things as B2, B2, B2C. Ultimately, there is an external customer, that's the recipient, but it's the external customer which drives the whole revenue for the complete organization. So for defense, Sally's would be taxation systems in New Zealand. You know, for banking, it would be the people who are taking out products with us, right? And they're paying interest on loans and paying interest on overdrafts and things like, hopefully not at the moment, but they will ultimately get back into that way of doing things. In the airline industry, the ultimate customer is the person who actually buys the ticket. That funds the whole supply chain, if you want to think of it in that way. Anybody else, any other observations on the OISM?
Just a comment perhaps about the success measures for Sally's example. Would defense measure things like, or keep an eye on, planned versus actual number of people in the field and their cost? Maybe the number and type of equipment that was used in mitigating the threat, and whether its usage incurred more cost than planned. You know, maybe things like that. If one's just looking at a process view within the start and end of threat raised to threat mitigated, what success looks like for that part of the story might be broken down by those measures if they're interesting to the organization.
Yeah, you could do that. And again, that would be depending on who have we got in the room, what's, and I like to bound everything that we're doing with what's the objective we're trying to do by asking these questions. And in our context here is to show the difference in perspective between process and, you know, the successful customer outcome. But those are all really relevant. As I said, the easy way to actually look at that box D is what are the metrics that tell us whether we're being successful or not at the moment. And predominantly they'll be about doing things. So if I was thinking of the car industry, for instance, what are the metrics there? It's very similar to the airline. It's operating at the lowest cost of operation with the highest revenue to create the biggest margin. You know, it's the bottom line. Now, will that change when we go outside in? Well, interestingly enough, as we said with the cinema example in week 1, we find that if we can do things which allow the customer to achieve success, if we've got that right, we get that revenue cost return mechanism in place. It comes as a consequence of doing the right things. So thanks for those comments. Let's move on now. So that's the process view, and you'll see on the left-hand side there it says process view, and it's not saying that's good or bad. It's not saying current state or future state. It's just saying these perspectives exist. So what we want to do with that perspective now is to actually sort of move into the beyond the process view and talk a little bit about the customer experience view. And another iteration though is to say that why here, why now? That's often the question. Can't we just carry on getting better at what we're doing, do the same old, but do it more efficiently and more effectively? And there is an argument that says, yeah, you could. However, that's not going to put you in a place which lets you understand the world better as it is now. And as we discussed previously, a lot of companies have fallen by the wayside, not because they were doing dumb stuff. They were doing stuff which wasn't relevant to what we need to be doing in the 3rd decade of the 21st century. Now, we might think, Sally might think, oh, well, in defense, you know, we're immune to that. We're not. We're all under these cost constraints now, and you know, goodness knows what's going to happen as a consequence of this crisis in terms of, you know, global GDP and so on. Like, it's going to take, you know, years to actually recover from this. And how will that change how we measure success? Because the measuring of success isn't just about delivering things. It's about achieving an outcome which is desirable either for an organization, for an individual, whatever it is. So the other area I use this as well, as you guys know, I'm a sort of a therapist. You're reframing yourself, thinking about, you know, what you do, you know, we say for a living, and people talk about work-life balance. Well, they're not really separate things anymore. You know, they're one and the same, they're intermingled. So, you know, we don't want to go to work just to make ends meet so we can enjoy ourselves in our downtime. We should really be enjoying work. So that's what we talked about, like companies like Zappos last week, is if work's fun, you actually look forward to participating in it. So whether it's virtually or physically or not. And so you can do this for yourself if you think about it in terms of who you are and what you do, and define that as the process view. And then we're going to move on to this customer experience view and shift that as a position. Now, you might find if you're congruent, then the answers will be pretty much the same, whether it's process view or customer experience view. In our experience, particularly talking with large organizations, the two are very different, and that's what we're going to explore now. So it's about customers no longer feeling as though they're just part of this sausage machine, they're just being churned through. And it's about treating them treating us as customers, as individuals, not as an amorphous mass or a demographic interpretation of who we are, but being able to apply a little bit more sense to it. So the customer experience view is the thing. It isn't rocket science. It's about, you know, leading people so that they'll come up with a bunch of answers which actually say to themselves, hey, oh, I get this. That was black and this is white. What are we, you know, what's the difference? And why have we always thought about it that way? And I think we've alluded to this idea, our education systems very much were predicated on this idea of developing people so they would work in factories. And if I had an educationalist in the room, they deny that now. They say, no, it's not. It's about letting people fulfill, you know, their you know, and there are some educational institutions that are all about allowing you to get to a successful outcome. But very large measures of success in terms of educational establishments, and Lyle was alluding to this earlier on, in terms of like universities and things like that, is getting people in, and then how many people do you get through the exams at the end of it? That sausage machine linear world is, thank goodness, changing now to actually sort of begin to articulate for us in that context as students, what does success look like for you? And is everything we're doing in our establishment aligned to delivering that? And frequently we'll find, no, it was never designed to do that, was it? It was designed to get you through the exam. And the rest, I'm sorry, you have to go away and worry about if we get you through the exam, right? Whereas those people seeing the complete customer experience there sort of say, well, we can only take care of this bit of it, but if we're doing it in the context of understanding this, we're going to be in a much better place at the end of it for being able to offer a better service. So that's the whole essence of shifting to customer experience. Again, if you've got questions, you know, chip in at some point if it doesn't sort of gel together. So we can logically rethink service and products from the outside in, and then begin to move towards being customer centric. So let's think about it again with the airline industry. In box A, we asked the question, what industry are we in? And the airline industry is the answer. Now, let's ask a different question. What business are you in? Right. Now, the business that you're in is about what you deliver at the end. Right, so this is that first little bit of outcome thinking. What business are you in? And we've done, as you probably are aware from our conversations and the websites, quite a lot of work in the airline industry. And frequently when we get to this point, we say, what business are you in? People go, well, I've already said that, we're in the airline industry. And you go, no, that's what you do. You need to explain to me, what do you deliver as a consequence of what you do? So this is the difference between an output, what you're doing, and a measure of output, to the outcome about what you're achieving. So we're going to explore that territory in some detail in a couple of weeks' time when we talk about performance modeling and things like that, when we connect the dots. But for now, it's sufficient to actually sort of say, okay, in box C, what business are you in? Well, what I actually do is move people, right? And Southwest Airlines would say that's about moving people both physically and emotionally. So we're in the business of moving people. And immediately you start thinking that way, you think, oh, right, okay, so we wouldn't benchmark ourselves against other people in the airline industry. If we were to contrast ourselves, we ought to look for other people who are really good at moving people. And so all of a sudden that opens the doors to, well, I wonder how, say, for instance, Otis lifts do that. Well, I know mechanistically how they do it, but in terms of the business of moving people, what's their onboarding process? How do they get people to use our products and services? And as bizarre as that sounds, is if you're, say, Otis lifts or Otis elevators, for those folks in the States, is your business comes from selling those systems to people who are putting up big tower blocks and big office blocks and so on like that. Perhaps less so in the future now as we begin to change the dynamic of the way we work, but historically that's the way it's been done. And if I was an architect and a builder and I wanted to build this big office block, I'm really interested in being able to move people about the building, we're doing it in such a way that I minimize the amount of floor space because the rest of it I want to get rent from. Therefore, in a competitive environment, if you're Otis lifts / elevators, you want to be looking at technologies which are not just about taking up huge amounts of space in the lobby, but having smart systems which can allow people to navigate around the building in a more meaningful way. Does that make sense? So if I was thinking about the business of moving people, it's different to just being an airline. So in this context, the guys said, oh yeah, we're in the business of moving people. So likewise yourselves, take a couple of minutes and think about it. So Sally and Defence, what business are you really in? What's the outcome that you achieve on behalf of New Zealand and citizens, for instance? Ali, in terms of thinking about banking, what is the outcome there? You know, what would that be? So just take 2 minutes and write your own versions down in box E. So I'm going to pick on Lyle this time. And Lyle, I don't know which business or industry you're thinking about, but what do you have in box E?
So, well, I'll do the contrast between the industry and the business. So the industry is advice remediation, so financial advice remediation.
Okay.
And the business that they're in, I think, is confidence, reaffirming or restoring.
Oh, okay.
So if the person had good advice and they were not disadvantaged by it, then having that objective view that says, yes, you're all right, gives you confidence that you're all right. And if you were disadvantaged, then the compensation would restore your position so you're all right. So you can confidently go into your future, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. Anybody else got something interesting there?
Yeah, I can chip in. So in the case of banking, I guess it's about planning for and meeting the financial needs throughout the lifetime of human being.
Yeah.
You know, Westpac actually, because they're a 200-year-old bank, you know, the oldest one, they sort of claim that they're sort of building a nation. You know, in that fashion, which is a bit of a stretch, if you ask me. But yeah, you know, that idea of anticipate, you know, like bushfires and things like that happen here.
Yeah.
Helping people through that kind of event is what they do.
Yeah. And
I think actually that building a nation thing, sorry, Steve, is actually quite grand. Because, you know, if you think about the very, very, very old story of the brick builder, the bricklayer, one bricklayer would say, look, I'm laying bricks. Another bricklayer would say, I'm building a wall. Another bricklayer would say, I'm building a cathedral. You know, is that kind of thing where is actually, if you orient your business around the outcome of, you know, building a nation, that's something quite grand and noble to get behind as a staff member. And as a customer, you go, yeah, I want to start a business, or I want to build my own patch of whatever. That would be quite a rallying cry, I think.
Yeah. And I think to that point, that, you know, having like the business of moving people, you know, the building a cathedral is quite often those are just platitudes, you know, they're like mission-y, vision-y things. And the way to see if that's real or not, again, is to have a look at the metrics, have a look at the measures of our success, and are they pointing in that direction? So like your story, Lyle, I'm always reminded of one when we're at this sort of stage, is about JFK visiting Cape Canaveral, when they sort of said, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to get off this planet and we're going to do some smart things. We've got to do it by the end of the decade. And as he was wandering around the building, and again, this is one of those anecdotes, whether it's true or not, but it serves its purpose in the same way as the bricklayer, is he was going down the corridors and, you know, the sort of back corridors to actually get up onto the stage and up to the launch pad. And as he was going down, he was walking past the cleaner. So the cleaner said, you know, hello, sir, how are you? And JFK stopped and apparently sort of said, so what is it that you're doing for NASA? And his response was very directly, I'm helping getting a man to the moon. That's what my job's about. And so again, exactly as you were saying, Lyle, that's quite inspiring if you can create that ethos in the organization, as long as it's not just a platitude and another missiony visiony thing that we all have up on the wall. I always like insurance companies, don't they? We're in the business of peace of mind. And you go, hey, you're not giving me any peace of mind. The way you make me go through this claims process, the way you know, the purgatory of actually having to get through your red tape, you know, that's not peace of mind, is it? So we'll come on to that one. So yeah, good, great contributions there. Ravi, do you have anything different you'd like to say there? Oh, he's gone off. He's making a cup of tea. Not to worry, we'll do that one offline. So with box C, in the context of the airline, let's sort of put moving people in there. So now, this question, the next question, where is the beginning and where is the end of that? So how does that hang together in this context? So shorthand for this is, where does the experience really start and end? And another sort of quick way of getting at this, and we saw it a little bit last week when we were talking about Disney's interpretation and listening to the customers, the questions that they asked, and then discerning from that what the real need is. Remember? So the young woman with two small kids, what time is the 3 o'clock parade? That's what she says she wants. But the real need is, where can I be somewhere sheltered from the hot afternoon sun, by a little rise by where the parade's going to go, with an ice cream vendor and a water fountain. Yeah, so we figured out what the needs were. Now, not surprisingly, our measurement system can reflect that. So in this sort of context, what is the beginning, what the end? The shorthand way of thinking about it is, where does the need arise? And then when is the need satisfied? So we're thinking about experience in that context. So when we're thinking about the sort of the airline question, it really goes back to the need arises when I think of a need for a trip. And it isn't over, as far as my experience as a customer is concerned, until I'm back home with a glass of wine or something similar. Make sense? So again, in your own context, write your understanding in box F. So where does the experience start and where does the experience end? Okay, so you should have 2 points, which are a little bit further out than our original process points. And some people start to panic here. They go, yeah, but I don't have the remit to fix all this. And you go, no, it's not about that. It's about understanding that everything that you're doing is in the context of that. And you shouldn't be doing it in isolation from that. So as we begin to deliver on this promise that the customer experience is the process, and we can begin to engineer, our starting point is the stuff we can control. Obviously, upstream and downstream is way beyond our control at the moment, potentially. But hopefully, as we begin to embrace the whole idea of this customer experience ecosystem, we can put ourselves in a place where all our decisions are informed by that perspective of, where does the need arise and then when is the need satisfied. All right. And we'll see where this takes us to in a few minutes. But next question is in terms of not so much what we call touch points, but moments of truth. Now, for guys who've not come into contact with moments of truth before, a bit of historical perspective on it. Invented back in the 1970s, a guy called Richard Norman was a consultant. Well, he was a student at the time when he was writing his university thesis, but he became a consultant that specialized in this arena of what he referred to as moments of truth. Any interaction with a customer is a moment of truth. Now, recall what we were saying a few minutes ago. This is completely scalable. So if you're an internal, say, finance function, delivering, financial products within the organization, is what are the touch points, the moments of truth between you and your customer? And it might be an internal customer. What are your touch points between those internal customers and the external customers? And they're all moments of truth. So we're going to explore moments of truth on another time. And I know Lyle's been through some of this stuff before, and as a qualified BP Group coach, you'll be reassured to know we're not going to do all that stuff we used to do at moments of truth. It's much more simple than that now. So you'll be pleased about that in a couple of weeks, Lyle. But the idea of moments of truth was taken from Richard Norman by a guy called Jan Carlson, who was another Scandinavian, who was president of Scandinavian Airlines. And what he did was identify how many interactions, how many moments of truth are we having with the customers every day? And of those moments of truth, what are moments of magic? Yay, where everything goes well. And what are the moments of misery when everything fails, right? Now, what can we do, understanding those, is to eradicate the moments of misery. Not surprisingly, in doing that, they made the customer experience much better. And for a period of time, Scandinavian Airlines were the top of the sort of league in terms of European airlines. Jan Carlson subsequently went off, wrote a book called Moments of Truth, and a lot of people thought he was the inventor of it, but he wasn't. They actually have in Sweden the annual Richard Norman Day. So just in the same sort of way that we might have had a public holiday yesterday to celebrate recently the Easter. You know, what's happening next week? Oh yeah, we're not in on Monday. It's Richard Norman Day. Who the hell's Richard Norman? You go, he's the Moments of Truth man, right? So around the rest of the world, everybody thinks it was Jan Carlson, but it wasn't. So as there's an observation there, Bain & Co. were conducting some research that suggested upwards of 70% of moments of truth occur before contact with the service or product provider. So what does that mean? So say, like Ali going into banking, is by the time somebody arrives to apply for a loan, we've probably spent as a customer quite a bit of time doing our research about what products are like, who's the best provider, who's going to be easiest to do business with, and all those other sort of things. So if you think about the process and the customer experience, if 70% of it is out here, only 30% inside the process, then you know we really should be tasked with thinking about the context of the larger picture, because otherwise we're hostage to fortune of everybody else who's already beginning to do that, and well, we're just focusing on the process. Now, I don't want to denigrate any organizations, but we talked a little bit about Nokia and Apple, and now sort of 10, 12 years ago, Nokia's demise was heralded by the launch of Apple's iPhone. Well, Apple were very much thinking about the experience they wanted to create for you and I as a customer, right? Whereas Nokia were thinking about, well, how do we make phones better and get them to market more quickly? Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as it's aligned with a successful customer outcome. It can become a bad thing when you've lost your connection with what success looks like for a customer. And of course, Apple redefined yours and my expectations by launching the world's first comprehensive smartphone. I mean, smartphones had existed for a couple of years before that, but designing it from the outside in meant that yours and my expectations suddenly went much higher about what a phone should do, right? And accordingly, our assessment of what phone device we were going to use was then, well, yeah, I might not like Apple, but hey, there's other smartphones out there now by Samsung or Huawei or whoever, right? And we're all using those devices now. You know, thanks, Mr. Steve Jobs. You know, it doesn't matter what variation. Oh, I've got a snowy scene in Colorado there. It doesn't matter what device we've got. We've all been informed in that way. And just as the market can change overnight, Nokia was still doing things they'd done in the past, which had created their success, but now were no longer relevant in terms of the context of the customer. So it wasn't people doing dumb stuff. It was people doing stuff that was no longer relevant to where we were at that time. So what I want you to do now is think about the moments of truth. And really they're like, if you want to think of upstream of in the airline, buy the ticket, and downstream of collect the bag. Make sense? So if you think about it from a customer's point of view, so that would be, you know, review the airline options, get into the airport, after you've got your bag, returning home, and then hopefully meeting your loved ones again, all right? So the process will be embedded within that, but you've got some things which are upstream and downstream. So write those things down for yourselves. What I like to think of is, again, there's probably 2 or 3 upstream of your process starting point, and there's probably 2 or 3 downstream of that, which really embody the complete customer experience. And when we go offline with this, between this week and next, revisit some of these questions and try it from a different organization's perspective, somewhere where you're a customer and you're receiving service, and say it's like Woolworths. What's it like? Where does the process view, where does it start and where does it end, and what is the sort of the experience all about? What would that be? Okay, so we should have a bunch of things in there as well. Is everybody comfortable with that? Good, good, good. Right, so we nearly finished the outside in strategic matrix, so we can now move on to box H. What is the successful customer outcome? And we're beginning to get to that place now where we're understanding things more from an outside-in perspective than we did. What would it be in the context of the moving people? And this is as you probably gathered, this is a real live example that we worked a few years ago. And the observation there is what success looks like on behalf of our customer, their successful customer outcome. And in the context of Emirates, they said it's beyond tomorrow. So you go, oh yeah, that's one of those weird, wacky things. You go, no, actually it isn't. Is they're less intent on selling you the service on board the plane, flying on a Dreamliner or flying on a 380 or something like that, which they say is a given. We're going to be best of breed at what we do around about that. What we're really interested in is your success when you arrive at your destination. So it's what you're going to do beyond tomorrow. So whether you're on holiday/vacation or whether you're going for business. So beyond tomorrow will be your successful customer outcome. Does that make sense? Now it sounds a bit like out there, and as I said with these things, sometimes there's sentiments that we see like peace of mind, yeah, but how much of what we're actually doing is aligned to achieving that? So within Emirates context is how much of what we're doing at a day-to-day level contributes to you being beyond tomorrow? So by definition, there's things there that you have to arrive relatively refreshed, able to get on with doing what you want to do, either being a tourist or whether you're on business, whatever it is you're trying to do. Naturally, a given is that everything should have been nice and easy, safe. It should all have been efficient, all those other sort of things that go with that. So beyond tomorrow embodies a whole sort of rationale to do with your individual success as a customer. So in your own context, guys, think about what would that successful customer outcome be. So Lyle was playing with some ideas earlier on in terms of the business you're in being the business of confidence. It's not so dissimilar to that question. Sometimes it's the same answer. So give yourselves 2 minutes to think about that. Okay, would anybody like to share their magnificence? What have they actually got? So Ali, would you like to sort of kick us off on that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, thinking about banking in general, I guess in the first column, the process parts of it, if I think about me growing up, is opening your first savings account, getting your first ATM card, and having a credit card at 18 for the first time, and then obviously a home loan. And there are needs that need to be met at certain places. But then ultimately, when I think about that in a bigger context of that right-hand column, it's to me around behavioural change and effective planning to meet your needs. So, one of the big issues we've got facing us is the danger of outliving your wealth. And the, we've got a basic level of security that we need to plan for that's sort of mandatory. And we know a lot of people aren't saving enough generally for certain things, or they're underinsured. So that's sort of, I guess, the security bottom end. And then the top end is, I want a lifestyle of adventure. How do I fund that and ensure that I can have that top end as well? What does that, how do I meet those needs and milestones to make that possible for me?
Yeah. And interesting you touch on that. A lot of banks are very product centric. You know, what products have we got? Whereas actually moving to being customer centric is meeting that lifestyle need, and not just chucking another product at somebody because you go, oh, by the way, you're going to run out of money when you get to sort of 85 if you live that long.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about that? And rather than fear, uncertainty, and doubt, is actually building, with your customers, this idea that you may be thinking this way now, and we can help you with that. And here's a service that, and it's like this whole freemium idea is, let's give you some counsel and advice and let the customer make the informed choices.
That's exactly right. So financial literacy is a big gap, right? And but one of the banks here gets a lot of criticism for its in-school account thing as sort of a rather insidious way of getting customers. But and I sort of partly agree with it. We want them to learn to save, but actually having people at a young age educated about the danger of credit cards and the consequences of things, that's a big gap that they should be filling, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and it is about sort of health and well-being, isn't it? So if you're one of the banks we've worked with here in the UK, for instance, which is open 364 days a year and closes usually at 11 p.m. at night, they're all talking about health and well-being. That's the business they're in. And of course, if you're healthy and you've got well-being, then you're going to have all the right sort of products and services. Those things follow. They're not what we lead with. They're what people will pull into their environment based on their needs. So, Sally, I'm interested in what you might have here.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
So this was, I found this quite tricky, but what I ended up with for the success for defence, or what does it look like? I went with the people that live in New Zealand as the customer, and their successful customer outcome is probably the free will or freedom to live your best life. That was, but I had some difficulty with working through the moments of truth for that client, because quite often we don't have, we might do things as an organisation where it's not a direct moment of truth for that client.
And that's a good point, actually, Sally, because you can get what we refer to as nested moments of truth, where you'll have a big macro moment of truth, and then you break these moments of truth down. And Google have done quite a lot of work in that space over the last few years, where they've refined the science around moments of truth now to refer to things like macro in-process moments of truth, then micro moments of truth. And in your context, you've probably got several macro ones, which are about safety, security, continuity, free will, all those sort of things, which are moments of truth because they're actual interactions that we would have in terms of informing the state about how we want to do what we are capable of doing and how we protect. But at an in-process and a micro level, citizens are not experiencing those unless there's some sort of situation developing. There's somebody doing things they shouldn't ought to be doing, some immigration issue or something like that. Those would be the in-process moments of truth. So I'm working with one defense organization in North America who will remain nameless. So we were looking at the distribution of equipment to Afghanistan. And what is the moment of truth with being able to more ably get tanks in the field compared with not being able to? Well, who is the customer in that context? What does success look like? And you get into, as you say, it can be quite trippy, because you get into all these things. Is one anecdote one of the generals told me a few years ago now. He was bemoaning the fact that everything had changed in the last sort of 15, 20 years. Because he was saying, you know, back in the day, back in the last century, we used to have one customer for us, and that was the Soviet Union. Go figure. He said, but now we've got all these customers all over the world, popping up here, there, and everywhere, and we've got to be really agile. You know, we've got to be really flexible in our capability to actually meet their needs. I was saying, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way of thinking about customers and the people that you deliver your products and service to. Yeah, but it may be valid. You know, our definition of customer might be interesting sometimes. So thanks for that, guys. Again, if you want to share any of these offline, you know, send them sort of to me, direct message them to me or whatever. If you want me to sort of critique them again offline, then that's what I exist to do. And if not myself, I can, you know, ask one of our team members to have a look at them on your behalf. We might have a bit more sort of industry knowledge sometimes, because we've all got different specialisms. Anybody else want to contribute what they've got at this stage? No, we're good. Fantastic, good. So let's move on. That's you know, a big thing to get completed outside in strategic matrix. It's completely scalable, so you can do it at this macro level across a business. Sally, you want to say something? Oh no, you just adjusting the camera. So you can do it at a macro level. You can do it down at a departmental level. You can do it at your own, as I said, your own individual level. And I use this in a sort of therapeutic context sometimes. Is, you know, when somebody presents themselves, said post-traumatic stress disorder. So what process are they in at the moment? Oh, I'm going through a breakdown. Where does that start and end? Well, it started with that traumatic event and it's still going on. So what are the key interactions there? Well, I've been to see the doctor, I'm on some medication, blah, you get the idea. And then reframing that from an outside in. So what is it you would like to be? What would success look like to you? And then beginning to articulate that so that people can begin to work to a better outcome for themselves. And the day-to-day behaviors can then inform that achievement of the better outcome. So I like this mechanism in all scales, and it's over the years it's become refined. It used to talk about current state, future state, but as we've already observed, the customer experience has always existed. It's not something new. It's not something somebody's invented somewhere. It's just people are drawing our attention to it more. You and I as consumers have got higher expectations than ever before. We're more fickle in our choices. We're less loyal. We're more promiscuous in terms of exercising those choices. So Ellie going into banking and starts talking about promiscuous customers. You get some strange looks, but you know where I'm coming from though, is that people will, you know, if they've got a choice, they'll have several products with several organizations. They're not going to be dedicated to you anymore. You know, they are going to exercise, you know, I can get a good savings account over there, but I get a good home loan over here, and my pension's with these guys. You know, that's the way it's working.